Okay, here we go. Hello, everyone. So today I want to talk about how to heal our emotional wounds, how to heal the places inside us that are hurting, so that we can have more effective lives, so that we can have healthier relationships, at least more meaningful and fulfilling and loving relationships that we actually love and enjoy being in, and so that we can have the lives that we all really want. And so I want to talk about why this matters a little bit, and then I'm going to share with you how I began going through this process so you can sort of get an idea of how this might work for you, or how it might apply to you. So the thing with healing our emotional wounds and healing our pain is that when we don't do it, all of that pain will start to show up in your life in all kinds of ways, right? Generally, these show up as protective mechanisms, destructive mechanisms, coping mechanisms. So when we carry around anger, for example, shame, or like fear that we're not good enough, fear that we're not going to be taken care of, fear that we're not respected, fear that other people aren't going to show up for us, we can sometimes develop hyper vigilance around independence and taking care of myself. These can show up as people who are overly controlling. This can show up as perfectionism, right? When we have fear that we're not good enough and there's a wound around not being good enough. Sometimes what I see is people go after overachievement and perfectionism, right? And then they project that onto other people, expecting other people to live to their standard. Sometimes we see people who are overly critical, that have a lot of self-righteousness, self-judgment. This shows up as anxiety for a lot of people that have anxiety wounds, and they can have really overwhelming behaviors that come as a result of that wound, right? I know that one well. When you're afraid that you're not going to be loved, that you're not going to be seen, heard, respected, you can really start to see this show up in people's lives in really frantic ways that are overwhelming, sometimes not listening to boundaries. Sometimes it looks like not having boundaries. And then when we're afraid we aren't going to be able to have boundaries, or we don't know how to enforce our boundaries or communicate our boundaries, it can show up as just disconnection. And we start throwing up walls, because that's the best way that we know how to have a boundary. And so we can end up having a lot of walls in our lives and be overly boundaried, right? That's the whole anxious avoidant relationship dynamic that can be really painful. I see a lot of people dealing with their emotional pain through drinking, through eating, emotional eating, YouTube, binging. Some people turn to drugs or alcohol, or they just have no expectation for themselves and they adopt like the loser persona, all kinds of things where when we don't actually go inside and heal our original wound that is really calling to be healed, we end up living it out in the world. Okay. And so here's the thing about healing the places that are hurting inside is it requires 5 things. And I have found this through practice, and I had to kind of learn some of this the hard way. But when you're able to get a handle on this process and start to really practice it, all of a sudden you start to realize how capable you are, how sufficient you are. You're able to have so much more compassion, love, empathy. You're able to start being able to breathe through your anxiety and be able to see the other person instead of being so worried about, am I getting what I need, what I need, what I need, and pushing, pushing, pushing. You're able to just kind of breathe and be like, what is this person needing? And because your needs can all of a sudden start to be met and nurtured in all these other ways, and you're able to get out of the scarcity and the fear and into that abundance and that creativity, and you can start to see how everything you need is already right here. And there's such freedom in that. So here's the 5 things that it really requires to be able to heal an emotional wound. And the first is awareness. The second is acceptance and allowing that fear to be there, that shame, that anxiety, that self-judgment, the criticism, right? We so often just want to avoid the feeling. And so we start trying to change the world and control, get people to respond different, get people to act different, do something different in order to meet our needs. But if we can just be with that thing and allow it to be there and be in that place of acceptance, all of a sudden we get so much clarity, right? And then we can begin to move into understanding, which is the third component. The fourth component is nurturing and compassion. We can begin to have compassion for that place inside of us, and we can begin to heal it. And the fifth step is the courage to change it. So when you have the awareness and when you're able to drop into that acceptance and that allowing place, allowing it to be there without having to change the world so that it would just go away, all of a sudden you're able to understand it, to see it, to understand where it's coming from, and you're able to nurture that wound and actually heal that wound, and then step into being able to change it. And there's a whole process that goes into changing our belief systems and changing the things that we're thinking and believing about ourselves and about our world, and seeing the world differently. And it changes the way that we relate to those emotional wounds. So I'm going to go into that in more detail later. I'll explain each of those components as we talk about what it takes to actually find emotional freedom from these things. But for today, I just wanted to share with you one of the experiences that I had that was so pivotal in my beginning to understand this process of healing my own emotional wounds, so that they don't continue to show up in my lives, in my relation, in our lives at this point in my life, in my relationships, in such painful ways. And so one of the most pivotal experiences I had with this process was the experience, in fact, that set me out on this entire journey. It was where everything shifted for me and changed for me. And I was probably about 23 years old, and my drinking and my depression had worsened severely in those years. So I had been deeply lost in my own darkness, my own depression, my own self-hatred for years at that point. And I was a complete mess, a nearly friendless alcoholic. I had separated myself from friends, family, and I had a moment of profound realization as I was walking home from my coffee shop job that day, because I didn't have a car and I was pretty broke. And what I realized was that my drinking and my depression had worsened severely after my dear friend had committed suicide. And I went into a place of total emotional dysregulation and powerlessness around how to actually deal with all the pain that I was feeling. Drugs and alcohol and the deep, dark hole that felt so familiar to me seemed like the best and really only option at that point for how to deal with everything that I was feeling. And so as I was walking home, though, what I realized was I had created so much destruction in my life, so much destruction. And I was in so much pain and acting out in all these ways. And what I realized was that a thought came into my awareness, and I thought, wait a second, I'm not just grieving for Dan. And I realized that everything that I was going through was so much bigger than that. I realized I was needing to grieve for my entire life. And this opened a floodgate for me. This was the equivalent of like stubbing your toe and you know, lose your mind and with tears and sobbing and theatrics, right? But it's not really about the stubbed toe. It's about something so much deeper. And Brene Brown refers to this as chandeliering, right? And we do this in relationships too, right? You go through a breakup, or you go through and you're just completely emotionally dysregulated. You're completely, you know, having all this rage, anger, grief. You're feeling so indignant, and I was violated and disrespected and all this shit. But really, it's all tied to this deeper emotional wound that has never been processed. And so we find these patterns, right? There's a reason that those things that upset you so much, there's a reason they upset you so much. And generally it's tied to so much deeper stuff that has never been processed. And so what I realized that day was that all this self-destruction that I was creating in my life, it was just a way for me to produce evidence for myself that I had a reason, a valid reason to feel sad and alone. And so I was producing all this evidence for that in the world so that I could believe it. I had always felt that way, but I had never really honored the experiences that actually created that for me. And so what I was really wanting to feel sorrow over was for my childhood and for all the emotional devastation that I had felt my whole life, the profound neglect of being left alone in a world because my care providers were too busy with just trying to survive themselves financially, emotionally, physically, right? And they were so in their own survival mode that they really just couldn't be there for me. And I was really realizing that what I needed to feel sorrow over was for all the love, the care, the nurturing, all the support that I so deeply needed, but that just simply was not available to me. And it still wasn't available to me because now I was perpetuating that, right? Perpetuating evidence for that. I was continuing to recreate that same result in my life so that I could continue to feel sad about it because I had never done it intentionally. It was below my awareness, something that my nervous system, my body, my mind, my heart knew I needed to grieve for. And I was just living out that sorrow instead of going inside to that emotional wound at the heart of all of this and just being with that and feeling that and healing that and allowing that, right? I had so pushed it down and buried it so deeply. And so it was really poisoning my life because I had never just gone and dealt with it. And so it just kept recreating itself. And this is what happens with so many of us, with our anger, with our shame, with our criticism, with our judgment, with our perfectionism, with our feelings of not feeling good enough, not feeling worthy, not feeling loved, not feeling respected. We have so much that we project into our relationships with coworkers, with kids, with lovers. And so what I decided that day was that I was going to give myself one full week of intentional and undivided time to simply acknowledge and grieve all the things in my life that had never been acknowledged, had never really been seen, validated, right? Understood, cried for, felt over. And so I decided that day that I didn't need to wait around for someone else to tell me or give me permission or validate the pain or the loss that I had been through. I didn't need someone to look and say, yeah, those things were sad. That was hard. That was unfortunate. Like that validation that I was looking for, that permission to feel sad. I was like, I was waiting for someone else to give me that. I was like, I can give that to myself. I could simply decide for myself that these things were big and important and painful and that they were worthy of feeling sad over. And that created the freedom for me to not have to keep creating evidence for it in my present life. And so I resolved that at the end of that week, I would make a new decision about where I wanted to go with my life from there, that I wasn't going to continue living there. I was going to go deal with it, and I was going to move on to something new. And so I was done trying to live out the sorrow, like I said, in my day-to-day experiences. And after just allowing myself to feel those feelings and to be there with them and to honor them, then it was going to be time for a new choice, a new path, a new decision about what my life was going to be devoted to instead of continuing to rehash this grief that had never been intentionally processed. And the answer that came up in its place after I had gone through and done all this work was contribution. And what I noticed was that as I allowed those things to come up and I was with them and I processed them through, I had space for something new. And I could literally feel my gaze turn towards a new horizon in my life. That shit was not going to be in the driver's seat of my life anymore. It didn't need to be there anymore because I dealt with it, right? And all of a sudden I had all this new space. I was like, what am I going to put there instead? And I began to realize that I could make a difference in the world, that I could have something to contribute. And that was really where my life began. My life shifted in a phenomenal way. And the journey was not fast or easy. It was uncomfortable to go through those feelings. I literally sat down and I wrote in pages of journals for all the things that I had to feel sad about, that I had to honor, right? But I will say it was so worth the effort. And it's still worth it. I'm still doing this work and I'm still so grateful that I am. Here I am 13 years later, or however long it's been. And, what I will say too is that this came in pieces, right? It wasn't a one and done process. I went that day what I realized was my need to go to honor my grief and to feel and process and allow my grief to be there. It was painful and it's exactly what I needed, but it was a raw, authentic, real kind of pain. It wasn't that chronic, dull achiness that I was just creating day in and day out as a substitute for feeling my sorrow. I went into my true, real sorrow, and it was raw and it hurt, and then it could heal. And so after the grief, then I had to do this with anger. And then I noticed, holy shit, okay, I did it with my anger. Now shame, now self-judgment, right? And so over the years, I've had to go through this process over and over with all these different wounds that I have carried. And the deepest stronghold of them all has been my overwhelming and at times debilitating anxiety. I feel like I have dealt with my grief. I had dealt with so much of my anger, the shame, the self-judgment. I've made all this healing process, but the one that was the biggest boulder of them all that just was still there was my anxiety. That was the last, what has felt like the last stronghold. And I'll talk more about the healing experiences that I've had with that recently that have really allowed that to finally the way that the analogy that I use is like a giant boulder, and you're trying to like push and move the boulder and you just can't make any progress. And then all of a sudden one day, you start looking and you start moving all these little pebbles at the base of the boulder. And then all of a sudden there's that one experience, that one relationship, that one coworker, that one person, that one thing that you experience that you have. And when you move that little pebble, it's like all of a sudden the whole thing shifts and the boulder just falls away. Oh my gosh, you can literally feel the energetic difference in your body when you're like, I'm free of it. And it's sort of like, when a wound that's healing, it might still be a little sore for a while, but you literally can feel that shift. And that has been something that has happened with me recently with around this anxiety that I have been processing. And it's come in stages, but like I said, it has been so worth the journey. And just to know that it is possible. This thing that you're experiencing, that you're living out, living through, continuing to relive, it doesn't have to stay that way. There is a process for being able to go through finding the awareness, allowing the thing to exist without judgment, without trying to change it, right? To just be with it, to understand it, and then to actually nurture and heal the thing that's causing it, what's underneath all of it. And when you do that, you literally will find the power to change it. And so I just want to say that this works, that it is a process. And so give yourself some grace and some compassion as you go through this. Like I said, it's been 13 years of me going through this healing journey. And again, it's come in stages, first grief, then my anger, then and it's like and as I go through it, I find these things and that freedom has come piece by piece. But each and every stage, it's just so amazing to watch a new boulder fall away. And to watch a new boulder fall away and another one fall away. And as you create all this emotional space for yourself to have compassion, love, right? Contribution, generosity, kindness, empathy, compassion, creativity, connection, right? Strength, resiliency. All of that can begin to take its place and you can begin to grow those things in your life. And so I just wanted to share that with you today, that this is something that's possible for you. And if this is something that you feel like you really want or need more of in your life, I'm going to put a link in the comments. I created a free video and also a PDF guide that just walks you through the stages of processing a difficult emotion. So you can kind of get an idea of how this framework works. And you can watch through that video and see, what do I actually do with it, right? I've got this anger, I've got this resentment, I've got this shame, I've got this self-righteousness where I just always judge other people, or I've got this thing in my life where I keep running away or shutting down or disconnecting, or, I get kind of prickly, or I get kind of controlling, or I get super anxious, I overwhelm, right, myself and others because of this fear that I have, whatever it might be. And if you click on the link in the comments, you can take that emotion to this work and I'll show you how to go through this process. Okay. So that's a great place to begin if that's something that you're interested in. And then you can always shoot me a DM and talk to me about it more if you're interested in really learning how to do this, because it's amazing. All right. I love you guys. We'll talk soon. Bye bye.